Shalom and welcome to this week's Lighthouse Project. And the nightly sponsors are Anonymous in memory of Mordechai ben Yosef, Zichrono Livracha, in memory of Dvorah Fega bat Shmuel and Moshe Levi ben Shoshana, Zichrono Livracha, and for the Refuah Shalema of Chana bat Shani, Yaakov ben Penina, and Menachem Mendel ben Sarabatya, and nightly dedication, learning in memory of David Lankri, David ben Zohara, Zichrono Livracha, and Daniel Khan, Daniel Tuvia ben Yaakov, Yukatil HaKohen, Zichrono Livracha. May the neshamas have an aliyot. Also my personal dedication for the absolute Refuah Shalema, for Rezel Bas Miriam, and for Shterna Mezini Simcha Bas Tzivya, and also in memory of Hirschel ben Avrohom. Okay, so the title tonight is Constructive Criticism. Learning how to grow. So as you know, we always start with a modern day issue. The modern day issue is giving and receiving rebuke. There is a commandment in the Torah, Hocheach tochiach es amitecha. Rebuke, you shall rebuke your people. So I want to first start off with a couple of quotes from a book of the Rebbe of blessed memory called Hayom Yom. It has a daily thought for every day, written in 1943, and it has teachings that deals with rebuke, some about giving and some about receiving. So I'm going to quote to you three of these teachings. Number one, from Iyar 26, the command you shall rebuke is preceded by the words, you shall not hate your brother, for this is a precondition for the rebuke. The Torah continues, and you shall not ascribe sin to him, for if the rebuke was ineffectual, you are certainly the one responsible, for yours was not words coming from the heart. And that's based on a simple rule, that words from the heart enter the heart. So if it didn't enter the heart of the other, the finger needs to be pointing at ourselves. A second teaching from Elul 22. The teachings of Chassidus demand that before rebuking one's fellow man, one should, in quote, cut one's nails, end quote, so that people would not scratch each other. For the source of the other side, the dark side, cling to the nails. Every prick unleashes the kelipah and the sitra achra. So here we're having another warning of how to give rebuke. Here's one about receiving rebuke. Sivan 12. My father wrote a letter, cherish criticism, for it will place you on the true heights. So the father here refers to the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, Rab Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch, father of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, and he tells his son, cherish criticism, for it will place you on great heights. Here we're talking about how to take rebuke, how to take criticism. Okay, so what are we seeing here? There is an appropriate and an inappropriate way of giving and receiving rebuke. The appropriate way takes us and others to great heights that we can reach on our own, and while the inappropriate way will bring us to ugly depths which we cannot reach on our own. The modern day issue of this lecture is therefore how to give and receive rebuke appropriately. When done appropriately, it takes you to the greatest heights. When done inappropriately, it takes you, unfortunately, to the ugliest depths. Now, this lecture is connected to this week's Torah portion because it is based on a Maimer, the teaching of the Rebbe delivered on the Shabbos in 1965, exploring the rebuke that Moses gave the children of Israel for the last 37 days of his physical life. And now let's get into the introduction. Last week we finished the fourth book, the book of Numbers, and this week we begin with the book of Deuteronomy. So I want to just point out that our sages teach us a very specific difference, distinct difference to be found between the first four books and the fifth book, the way it was delivered via Moses. And the truth is that the opening verse of the fifth book already points out the difference. Here, let me quote you the words. These are the words that Moses spoke. Now that's very different. You'll never find those words in the first four books. In the first four books, the words of Moses are always preceded with Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer, and God spoke to Moses saying, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. It's very clear here that the speaker is God, and the delivery is through Moses. Yet over here, the opening verse says, and these are the words that Moses spoke. It doesn't say that God told Moses to speak. And thus our sages extrapolate from here that the first 4 books were, and I quote to you from the Shemot Rabbah, the divine presence spoke through his voice box. Moses was simply a megaphone through which God spoke. So much so that our sages tell us that, as we know from the story of his childhood with Pharaoh, Moses had a speech impediment. Yet whenever he spoke the words of the Torah, when God was speaking through his voice box, he didn't have the speech impediment. So people clearly, all the children of Israel, are clearly able to see that this isn't Moses talking, it's God talking through Moses. Now the 5th book is different. The 5th book was the prophecy of Moses. Very different when Moses is giving prophecy or when God is speaking through his voice box. Now true, the prophecy of Moses, the verse says that there did not arise another prophet in Israel like Moses, because Moses had a total different direct form of prophecy, while all the other prophets in the book of prophets always spoke through visions. So there is a difference, but nevertheless, there's a difference between Moses' prophecy and when God speaks through his voice box. So here is something very different. And what the difference is that Moses in the book of Deuteronomy is giving his farewell sermon. He started it on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, and he passed away 37 days later on the 7th of Adar. And thus is called Deuteronomy, which is called Mishneh Torah, which the 5th book is a recap. Moses recaps for the Jewish people what he went through with them in the last 40 years. Now, I want to share with you, very interesting, in this book of Deuteronomy, Moses rebukes the Jewish people for mistakes they've made or their parents made during the last 40 years. So I want to share with you the opening Rashi. These are the words. Rashi goes ahead and comments on these opening words of the book of Deuteronomy, and he says, I quote, since these are the words of rebuke, and he enumerates here all the places where they angered the omnipresent, therefore it makes no explicit mention of the incidents in which they transgressed, but rather merely alludes by mentioning the name of the places out of respect for Israel. So what we're going to find here is that he mentions specific places and he calls them by specific names, and they're actually codes. So for example, one of the names he mentions is Dizahav. Dizahav means abundance of gold. He's hinting to them when they made the golden calf. Another one is called Ben Tafel Vilavan. Tafel Vilavan is referring to the manna, which was white and light. It was a food they ate that was very light. So here he's rebuking them subtly, indirectly, for when they spoke against the manna, demanding meat. So you see over here that Moses was giving them inexplicit, he was giving them some very subtle messages about the times when they botched up. Moses is giving them rebuke. However, here's a question. If Rashi just told us that Moses is not giving direct rebuke out of the honor of Israel, he's giving them code that they can understand the rebuke, then let's fast forward in Deuteronomy, and we're going to see in chapter 9, verses 22 and 24, I'm going to quote to you, you provoked the Lord to anger, you provoked the Lord. Here we're calling them the rebellious ones. Here we're talking about clearly that Moses was very explicitly telling them that you were rebellious, you did bad. Why the sudden change? Here we're saying that he does everything in hidden, subtle form so as to protect the honor of Israel, and here he outright calls them rebels and the likes. Why? So actually, Rab Moshe Alshich, he wrote the Sefer Alshich, it's called the Alshich HaKadosh. He asked these questions, and this is his answer. He says that Moses began his words with wisdom to explore the children of Israel's state of mind and heart to see if they were ready to receive rebuke. So in the beginning, he's testing the waters. He's setting subtle messages to see how the Jewish people are reacting. Is their heart humble and open to receive direct rebuke or not? And once he sees that they're ready, he gives them direct rebuke. This is the simple answer that the Lipszyc gives. Why? First we begin with subtle messages of rebuke, and then we get very explicit with the message of rebuke. However, in this lecture, we're going to explore the more mystical explanation of the Ramaz. The Ramaz, his name was Rebbe Moshe Zakudo, and you have a link to a little bit about him in the notes that will be emailed out. And this is the explanation which is based on Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and it's the one that the third Rebbe of Lubavitch, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch at Tzemach Tzedek, favors. So now that we have these introductions about why we're talking about rebuke, it's all what the book of Devarim is all about. It's about what the book of Devarim is all about. So thus he goes ahead and gives two forms of rebuke, and we're going to explore, according to Jewish mysticism and in practicality, what is the correct form of constructive criticism. So as you know, we always start here with a list of mystical concepts, and we explain each one on that list, and then we wrap it up with the practicality, and it all falls into place, and it makes beautiful sense. We leave here with a deep understanding of a mystical teaching of the Torah and how it affects us practically in being better people. So here's the list. Number 1, the 10 emanations. Number 2, hidden things and revealed things. Number 3, the soul levels. There's one category which is nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and the other one which is chaya yechida. Number 4, esoteric Torah and revealed Torah. Number 5, ma'or shebetoira, the illuminator of the Torah. And then after that, F, the last one, 6, F, we're going to go ahead and give a summary to wrap up what we're saying. So let's talk about the 10 emanations. According to the Ramaz, the two different types of rebuke that Moses gave, the subtle and the not so subtle, were two different rebukes aimed at two different spiritual dimensions that were affected by the sins, which now needed a tikkun. Tikkun means correction. So the rebuke was two different types of rebukes aimed at two different spiritual dimensions, each which was affected by our sins. In order to understand this, we will need to understand what in the spiritual realm is affected by our sins. Simply speaking, the infinite light of God cannot be affected by the actions of us finite beings. The infinite light does not react and is not affected by when we do good or when we do bad. However, in order for the finite worlds to be brought into existence from the infinite light, God introduced the 10 emanations, which serve as vessels through which the infinite light shines through and then comes out the other end as definitive light, such as the light of kindness, light of justice, light of compassion. The infinite light is beyond any of these descriptions. However, once it shines through the different vessels, it picks up these different descriptions. And you can think of it as the colorless sunlight shining through the color glass stained window, which now when the sun shines through the light on the other end, the light that shines through the red piece of glass is going to give a ray of red light, the one that shines through the green, the blue. So all of a sudden, from the colorless light shining through vessels, we now have very descriptive lights. So too the infinite light, which is neither kind, just, compassion, it has no form or shape. All of a sudden, it shines through these vessels, and now we have finite descriptive forms of light. Now these vessels can be affected by the actions, by our sins. Hello, Michelle. So, therefore, what we're talking about here is how the 10 emanations, through the sins, we actually have, so to speak, punctured holes in the vessels, and therefore the infinite light can be directed to where it doesn't belong. It can all of a sudden bring life and energy to the evil. And so too, not only can it go to where it doesn't belong, it can also go to be stopped from going to where it does belong. And thus we have the two experiences of the 10 emanations, how they're affected by our sins. A, bringing the energy to where it doesn't belong. B, not bringing it to where it does belong. Now these punctured holes, we're on page 3. So now, when we talk about the 10 emanations, we can now understand how our sins affect and why Reb Moshe Zakuro, the Ramaz, says that the rebuke of Moses was talking on two different levels, one for each different place in which it was affected. To understand this, we're going to need to talk about the 10 emanations, the Esses Sfirot, on a general level. They're divided into two. There are the 3 intellects, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which is the parents. And then there are the 7 emotions, which are called the offspring. Now these two categories are defined by a verse, according to Kabbalah, by a verse in Deuteronomy, where it says, Hanistarot Lashem Elokeinu v'haniglot lano v'neinu. The hidden things belong to the Lord our God, but the revealed things apply to us and to our children. And what we're saying over here is that the hidden things refer to the 10 intellects, while the revealed things refer to the 7 emotions. Why? Because the 3 intellects, the vessels are so transparent, and the light is so great, and therefore it is primarily divinity and less creation. Thus, to us, they're considered the hidden worlds. And therefore, when it comes to the 3 intellects and the impact that our actions have, our sin causes in the 3 intellects, over there you have the rebuke, which Rashi refers to as it's all done subtly and hinted. Why so? Because the Medrash in Mishli says it is sufficient to the wise with a hint. And because it's sufficient to the wise with a hint, therefore Moses just hints to them what the rebuke is, and it already is taken, and it suffices to make the tikkun, to make the correction that is needed. Now the emotion emanations in Kabbalah are called Zah. Zah is an acronym for Zeir Ampin, which is Aramaic for small faces. And why is it called small faces? Because the setup of each sphera is called a face, and because over here the vessel is opaque and the light is dim, therefore it's called small faces. And simply speaking, you know from the human traits that when we are in a state of emotions, we're less mature. When we're in a state of cerebral intellect, we're more mature. And so therefore, when we talk about the 7, the puncture and the problem, that the effect that the stain of sin causes in the 7 emotions, to correct it, we can't be subtle hints. Over here we need to speak directly, and we need to give a direct rebuke. And thus, according to Ramaz, that is why there is the 2 different forms of rebuke. There is the rebuke which is subtle, which is Dai L'chacham B'Ramiza. It's enough to the wise one when we speak in hints, and the maturity of the wise one will understand, and it will already bring about the tikkun. And then there is the immaturity of the small faces. There is the smaller dimension, which you can't just hint. The tikkun has to come about through direct rebuke. This is Kabbalistic. Now we need to talk about it, how it is in our level, in our soul. So I want to begin with stating that we are taught, and God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. That's a verse in Genesis. Now, the soul of man, being that it was created in the image, but God has no image, we're talking about the image of the 10 emanations. Thus, the soul of the human being has 10 faculties, 3 intellects and 7 emotions. There is the 3 intellects of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and then there are the 7 primary emotions, which is love, fear, compassion, persistence, gratitude, commitment, and regality. Now, these 10 faculties, just as the 10 emanations, divide into 2 categories, intellects and emotions. Now, stop for a moment, pause. I want to share with you that our sages tell us that the soul has 5 different names, reflecting to 5 different levels of the soul, which parenthetically speaking is why when someone is saying Kaddish for a parent, they light 5 candles because of the 5 levels of the soul. Now, these 5 levels, the names that reflect the 5 levels, they more generally, once again, break into 2 categories, the hidden and the revealed. The revealed level of the soul is the lower 3, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which is equivalent to the 7 emotions, the small faces. They are more linear, more finite, and they permeate our conscience. Then there is the hidden worlds of the soul, which is chaya yechida, which represent the circular infinite levels, which only encompass rather than permeate our conscience, and thus they are the hidden worlds. Simply speaking, let's not stop being so Kabbalistic for a moment. Simply speaking, there is the service and the effect of our actions upon our conscious and upon our subconscious. The language of our interaction with the subconscious is one that is more elusive, subtle, and indirect, while the language of our interaction with our conscious needs to be one of direct and implicit. I'll share with you a story, a man who I knew, a blessed memory, Rabbi Reuben Dunin. By one time when he had a private audience with the Rebbe asked him why he speaks such direct, harsh, and explicit language by his Farbrengens. And Dunin answered, Rebbe, I need my animalistic soul to understand. What does that mean? What that means is that we need that the immature side of us should understand when we're talking to it. If you ever try talking to a child and you speak to the child the language you may use with adults, such as being insinuative, suggestive, and subtle language, knowing that the mature adult will get what you're saying, the child will rightfully not understand what you're saying. Thus, we need to speak directly and implicitly. Now, on the other hand, when we interpret the message of the subconscious, such as dreams, for example, directly and explicitly, we would be getting the wrong message, for this is not the language of the subconscious. It is a hard-earned profession, literally psychology, to understand the makings and the language of the subconscious, its triggers, and how it acts out in different ways. So therefore, we're learning here that there's 2 parts of the human soul, and they both demand a different language. The lower 3 levels of the soul, which reflects the emotion emanations, which are linear, finite, they need to be spoken to in a direct rebuke fashion. While when we talk about the higher level of the soul, that which is encompasses, it's infinite, it's circular, it's subconscious, we must talk a different language. Talking the language of direct and interpreting the language as direct would give us the wrong message. Thus, now we understand on a deeper level why Moses in the book of Deuteronomy was giving 2 different types of rebuke. One was explicit and one was very subtle through hints. Moses was talking directly to that immature emotional part of us that needs to be spoken to directly, and Moses was also talking to our subconscious, our mature, which needs to be spoken to subtly, a different language. Now that we explained how this applies in the 10 emanations, and we spoke about how it applies in the human soul and in the human psyche, I want to take it to another level, which is how it applies in the Torah itself. So the Zohar volume 2 says, when God created the world, God looked into the Torah and created the world. So that means, as the Medrash in Bereshit Rabbah says, that the Torah says, I am the blueprint of the world. Therefore, what we find in the world, we need to also find in the Torah. Whatever's in the building has to be in the blueprints. So therefore, in the Torah too, we must have both the hidden world and the revealed world. The hidden world is the esoteric, Kabbalah, Chassidus, while the revealed world is what we call pshat, simple meaning, as well as Talmud and law. Now let's talk about, again, the rebuke. The difference between the rebuke of the revealed Torah and of the hidden Torah is that in the revealed Torah, even though the Torah is called Rahmana, which means compassionate one, there is within it the strictness of law and justice. While in the hidden Torah, there is only kindness and compassion, always ascending to that which is beyond the constraints of justice. The revealed Torah descends into the mind of the evil, while the hidden Torah brings everything up to their source, where all that exists is only goodness and kindness. Now let me share with you an example of each. How the revealed Torah deals with something which is not that good, and how the hidden Torah deals with that which is not good. And you'll see a perfect example of the difference of the rebuke that comes from the hidden word and the one that comes from the revealed world. The Talmud, let's talk about the revealed Torah. The Talmud, when trying to define the truth from the lie in a person's testimony, has what is called a migui. You'll have a link in your notes that'll take you to a page that'll explain to you exactly what the process of a migui is. However, let me just tell you in short what it's about. This is the process where the Talmud explores the defendant saying, trust me when I say X, for if I wanted to lie, a far better lie would have been to say Y. So he's giving you a logical reason that what he's saying is not a lie. However, we need to understand, what is the mind of the criminal? What is the mind of the liar? What is the mind of the ego and the corrupt? Thus, the way the Talmud deals with rebuke, understand, and justice for the criminal is by getting directly into his mind. It doesn't tiptoe around. It wants to know, is he lying? Is he not lying? What would he lie? How would he think? How would he try to fool us? Thus, it's directly embracing the mind of the criminal, trying to understand him, to know how to deal with him, how to bring justice to him, and how to give rebuke. By the way, for example, there's another statement in the Talmud. You have to make sure that ein choyte niske, the sinner can never profit from his sin. So even when the law would have him profiting, we have to stop him from profiting. So you see that the rebuke and the justice of the Talmud with the one who did something wrong is direct. Now let's talk about an interesting story from the hidden Torah. And here's an example that I'm just bringing. The Rebbe brings one of the mana, and I bring it in my notes. But I just think that this will be easier for us to understand a different teaching of Chassidus. When the Torah introduces the offsprings of Isaac, the verse begins with Ele toldot Yitzchak ben Avrohom. These are the offspring of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Now, what should be the next words? The next words should be the name Esau and the name Jacob. Those were the sons, the twins of Isaac. However, instead the Torah tells us who Isaac was born to and the story of how Isaac and Rebekah couldn't have children for 20 years. So it starts a sentence and then it goes into a couple of verses off track and then it comes back and talks about Isaac and Jacob. Esau and Jacob. So Rashi senses that the student, the child, is going to have this question. So therefore he helps the child, and on the very first words of the verse, these are the offspring, he quotes those words and he comments, Jacob and Esau mentioned in the Torah portion. That's all he comments. And simply speaking, he wants the child to know, we're going to get off track here, but you should know what the Torah is talking about. We'll get back to it soon. This is Pshat, this is the simple understanding of the revealed Torah. Here comes along Chassidus and explains the esoteric teaching of Rashi. And watch what it does. We're on page 6. Rashi is dealing with another question according to Kabbalah, what the student is wondering. The student, Rashi knows, is going to wonder that he is going to learn how Esau is such a bad person, a murderer, a thief, a rapist. So automatically Rashi knows that the child is going to have a simple question. How can such a holy and righteous man, our patriarch Isaac, have such an evil son? According to Kabbalah and Chassidus, this is what Rashi wants to explain. When he says, Ele toldot Yitzchak, these are the offspring of Yitzchak, the student's immediately going to wonder, how can Esau be an offspring of Isaac? And therefore, see how Chassidus explains the Rashi. According to Chassidus, Rashi is teaching us that the Esau who was Isaac's son was the Esau as he finds himself in the Torah. The way Esau exists in the source of all living in the Torah, Esau has the holy, infinite power of chaotic passion. The power of chaotic passion in itself is super holy, super righteous, and the greatest spiritual acts were all driven by this amazing, infinite, chaotic power of passion. However, then Esau went out into the world and used this power of chaotic passion to kill, steal, and rape. That was what Esau went out to make of himself, which was not the offspring of Isaac at all. Thus, according to Rashi, according to Chassidus, Rashi is differentiating for us that the Esau that exists in the Torah, that could have been the good of all good, who had this superpower of a chaotic energy of passion, that was Isaac's son. What Esau then went to do with his freedom of choice, that wasn't Isaac's offspring. So here you are seeing how the hidden Torah rebukes. The hidden Torah rebukes and understands and deals with the criminal is by showing him who he truly is. Look at yourself the way you exist in the Torah. Look at you at the way you exist in the power of true holiness. And who he can practically be if he was only to connect with his true definition of being and source, regardless of how low he has fallen and how perversely he has abused his holy God-given powers by cleaning the mirror, and the Chassidus showing, and the esoteric teaching and the hidden Torah subtle rebuke showing who and what you truly are. Thus is the way to rebuke from the esoteric teachings. The job of the rebuke of the esoteric teachings is that we often get our mirrors dirty and we don't see ourselves for who we truly are. And then we define ourselves by our perverse actions. But when it tells us who we are and shows us who we could truly be, then this subtle hint is enough for us to be able to understand and for us to be able to correct our ways. In my notes, which anyone out there who's listening who does not, who I don't have their email, just go ahead and post your email address and I'll send you a link with all the notes. In my notes, you're going to see that this example of the children of Isaac was one that I introduced from a different place. In this teaching itself, the Rebbe goes directly to one of the rebukes, which talks about tafel lavan, which refers to the manna. And the Rebbe explains how the message Moses is giving them through the esoteric teaching of the rebuke is that the power of the manna is that even though it was a spiritual food, it came down here and did not transform and gave us the life that we needed from the sustenance and the nutrients of the manna. Thus we talk about how the true definition of spiritual comes down here and is untainted by our actions. And thus, regardless of who we are, we still remain that spiritual goodness. And therefore we can always change who we are and change our actions. Now that you'll see in the notes. I just wanted to give you a clear, tangible, practical, easy understanding of how the Talmud gives Musar and how Chassidus gives Musar. Two different formats. One direct, dealing with the evil. One elevating and bringing out the source of the goodness. With this being said, I want to go to the next point, which is called the illuminator of the Torah. To understand this, we need to also understand a different aspect and distinction of the way the hidden Torah rebukes and the way they reveal Torah rebukes. What happens with the hidden Torah? How does it bring across to us the power of teshuvah? And the answer is, we're going to go to a teaching in the Medrash, and actually it's in achra, but before that it was in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. It talks about the verse in Jeremiah where he's giving a prophecy in the name, of God. Chapter 16, verse 11. And he says, "They forsook me," that's capital M, God's talking, "and did not keep my Torah." Now, because the verse states both, they forsook me and they did not keep my Torah, that means there's two separate things. That means, hypothetically speaking, it could have been that they would have forsaken God, but they did keep the Torah. And that wouldn't be as bad. How is that possible? You forsake God, but you don't forsake His Torah. And thus our sages extrapolate that what God is saying, if only when they left me, they would have kept studying the Torah, for the Ma'or, the illuminator within the Torah, would have brought them back to being good. Ma'or shebetoira machziron lemutav. Now, upon this teaching in the Yerushalmi Talmud, there is a commentator by his book is called Korban Ha'eda, and he makes a distinction that the teaching states not Or HaTorah would bring him back, not the light of the Torah would bring him back, but the Ma'or, the illuminator. And thus, the Korban Ha'eda explains that the teaching is speaking not of the studying that of the Torah, which is in which logic is prevalent, but rather he's talking specifically about the studying the Torah in which the divinity is prevalent, and that is the hidden Torah. In the revealed Torah, what is most prevalent is the logic, the civil law, the criminal law. You sense logic, but you know that this is God's Torah, God's wisdom. When you study the Chassidus and you study the Kabbalah, what you're actually experiencing here is predominantly all about the divinity. That's what you're feeling, and you're discussing, and you're engaging with when you're studying the hidden Torah. Thus, the Korban Ha'eda says that the teaching of Jeremiah's verse, that if only we would have continued to study the Torah, then the Ma'or Shebet-Torah would bring us back to God. We're talking about the hidden Torah. Thus, once again, you see the rebuke of the hidden Torah is not by focusing so much of who I am and how imperfect I am and how bad I am, but rather focusing on how perfect and how good is my Creator who has created me and planted that within me. So now I want to make a summary of what we spoke about. We have now a clear understanding of two different types of rebuke that we find Moses giving the Jewish people at the end of his physical life in the book of Deuteronomy. There is the direct rebuke. This rebuke is to bring about 1. The tikkun of the 7 emotion emanations. 2. Speaks to the service and the tikkun of the 7 emotion faculties of the soul, which needs direct talk. And 3 is the way of rebuke of the revealed Torah, which gets into the mind of the ego and works with it directly. Then there is this 7th page. Then there is the subtle rebuke. In the subtle rebuke, this rebuke is to bring about 1, the tikkun of the 3 intellect emanations. 2, it speaks to the service and the tikkun of the 3 intellectual faculties of the soul, for which it is sufficient for the wise with a hint. And 3 is the way of rebuke of the hidden Torah, which shows us the holiness from which we came and which we can be. That was, in short, everything we learned about this class. The way the rebuke, the 2 different types of rebuke in Deuteronomy, refers to the 2 different places in the spiritual realms that are affected by our sin, the 2 different services of the different categories of our soul, and then it is the difference between the hidden Torah and the revealed Torah. Now that we understand this, I want to go in closing back to our opening modern day issue. How to give and receive rebuke appropriately. Before I talk about giving rebuke appropriately, and we talk about the direct rebuke and the indirect rebuke, I want to talk to you first about what happened to our generation. Our generation is very different. Before the Shoah and the rest of World War II, the world, the Jewish community in particular, had a fundamental functionality that we operated on. The family unit, the community unit, organized religion, spirituality, all worked primarily upon a functional system. The child was brought up with a functional understanding of his or her Judaism, personal responsibilities, family responsibilities, community responsibilities, and responsibilities to a nation and a people. Then came along Stalin's communist regime, Hitler's death machine, and America's silence, which completely destroyed all of this. And in place of functionality, and in its place left a foundation of absolute dysfunctionality on every level, From the personal to the family to the community to the global identity and responsibilities, everything was turned on its head. And truly, we are a generation that's being brought up on foundations of absolute dysfunctionality, and the way we view our identity and the way we view our responsibilities to ourselves, our family, our community, our people, and to the world is absolutely dysfunctional from where we work right now. We deal with a really horrific sense of self-identity, insecurity, ego. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because in Jewish law, we have a category of, and I quote, a child who was taken captive among the Gentiles and never educated. The law is talking about the accountability and responsibility that a person has if he or she did something wrong. However, then it goes on and says, but what if a child was taken captive among the Gentiles and never educated in the ways of Judaism, in the ways of Torah? How can you hold such a child responsible for not keeping kosher, or for not keeping Shabbat, or for not understanding his Jewish identity? He never was educated with it. Now, what I'm saying is that this category is defining truly our generation in its entirety, being truly the products of a dysfunctionality after World War II. I say this as a prerequisite to understand when direct and not so subtle rebuke is necessary. Even when we're dealing with, okay, we can't be subtle about this rebuke. We got to speak very, very explicitly about what we're saying to who we're saying it. Nevertheless, because of what I'm sharing with you, that we all are in the category of a child who was taken captive and was not educated and really was brought up in a dysfunctional family environment, a dysfunctional political environment, a dysfunctional social environment. Thus, we must always exercise deep sensitivity, compassion, and total removal of any judging the other, even in the arena of giving direct rebuke. That's number one. Number two, however, the most effective way to give any rebuke today is of the subtle, empowering way of the hidden Torah. Now here I want to get personal. I want to share with you my personal experience with this latter form of rebuke, that which comes through Chassidus teachings, that which comes through the hidden Torah, that which comes through the subtle. In my life, it was my maternal grandfather who would be the one to rebuke me in discussions that we had, which stay with me until this very day. My family lived in the duplex that belonged to my maternal grandparents, and therefore they lived upstairs on the top floor. We lived on the bottom floor. I was pretty much a latchkey child. My mother and father both had to work very hard. I would come home from school, and our home would be empty, and I would deal with my grandparents upstairs. That's who pretty much I would come home to every day. Now, my grandfather always took a very deep interest into my schoolwork and my development. And very often, being, the child I was, he would have to give me rebuke. What was amazing about his form of rebuke was that by the time he finished, I felt like $1 million, empowered to know that I could make the change, and all the while being clear in what I did wrong. Now, my grandfather he knew how to do that. He knew how to tell me that what I did was really wrong and he expects more of me, but somehow he knew how to do it in a way which made me feel like $1 million. It made me feel what he saw in me, what I could be, where I come from. It wasn't about how rotten what I did was. It was really, for you, that is unbefitting. Why is it unbefitting for you? Because let me tell you who you are. So by the time my grandfather finished giving me rebuke, I didn't feel like a worm. I felt like $1 million. I felt empowered. Okay, I made a mistake. And now I know better who I am. And I know better how I should behave. I had no doubt. I was never humiliated, never feeling like a victim, or neither was I ever resentful at my grandfather for giving me the rebuke. I had no doubt of the love and place of caring from which it was delivered. Never was I feeling that this was about his being angry. It was always about my becoming a better person. This is how appropriate rebuke is delivered and how appropriate rebuke is received. Thank you.